Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Abdullah Samir with your friendly neighborhood ex-Muslim Abdullah Samir. Today, I'm joined by special guest Sadia Hameed. Hi, Sadia. How's it going?
Hi, thank you for having me, Abdullah.
Thank you. And you have been around a lot longer than me in this sphere. We're about the same age. When I was doing research on you, but you've been doing activism or been related talking about Islam and ex-Muslim stuff since when? When did you start doing all of this?
Probably about 4 years ago. Um,
Oh, okay.
so I've been an atheist for a lot longer,
Yeah.
but I hadn't done anything publicly until about maybe even 5 years ago, something like that.
Okay, so actually about the same time then. Okay, sounds good. Now, can you tell me a little bit about yourself? How did you end up, questioning Islam? And when you left Islam, what happened? Like, was there any sort of consequences in your life? I mean, obviously there were. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, so in terms of questioning Islam, it was just normal childish questions that I had most of my life, really. So I remember asking my mum about like where are God's mum and dad, and where are his children, where are his family? Doesn't he get bored? Doesn't he get lonely? And often I wouldn't really get any answers. But in terms of leaving Islam, the first time I left Islam, because I left Islam twice. The first time I left Islam, it was quite a boring story, actually. I was bored. I was 15 years old and I was just bored. I know people kind of want this sexy story of I left Islam and I was tortured and abused and experienced loads of violence. Just like not everybody has that story.
Yeah.
Um, Most people can just leave. There is a difference in the sense that you can't tell everybody, because I did tell my mum that I don't think I believe in God, and she said don't tell anybody else. We have to kill people when they leave. So naturally didn't tell anybody else. However, I still didn't believe in God. And it was just a case of, so this is quite common in terms of Pakistani families, and I know quite a lot of other communities as well. You're made to read the Quran, but you don't understand it, so
So
you
did
don't
you
learn.
grow up in the UK? Did you migrate to the UK? Were you born in the UK?
No, we were born in the UK, so
Okay.
my dad was born here, and I was born here too. Yeah, so we were taught the Quran, we were taught to read namaz and such, but didn't we weren't taught the meaning of it all. Now kids get bored easily. It's just a fact of life. So reading the same book over and over again and not understanding it, and then praying five times a day when I could be doing something more entertaining, it was just as simple as I got bored. And then the second time I left Islam, so I went back to it when I was 19 and got
Sorry, can I
engaged.
just ask though? Like, if you're just bored, like I know many Muslims don't pray. They don't
Mhm.
fast, they go drinking and clubbing and how is that a reason to leave Islam? Like when you say you're bored.
Yeah, I guess I just questioned whether there was anything, because if
Okay.
you've
So
been
it's more than
told.
that then. It was actually more than that. But the way you expressed it and the way you felt, you felt like it was restrictive in a way?
Mhm. Well, when we were kids, like there wasn't this, you didn't get to see that diversity within Islam as well. Like today we see that. Now I've met lots of Muslims that have sex, that go out drinking, that take drugs, that do everything that they're not supposed to do. Their big red line is pork.
Yeah.
That's the red line in their life, which is
Yeah.
strange.
Yeah.
So, quite often the only dividing line between a Muslim and a non-Muslim is pork, particularly the kind of more liberal, progressive uh, Muslims that we meet.
Yeah.
However, that wasn't the case when we were kids. When we were kids, you didn't see that distinction that much. It was just a Muslim community and all kind of shades of Muslim in that. But also within that, the kind of fundamentalists weren't that much that oh bless, that's nice from husband. Yeah, there wasn't that diversity within the kind of Muslim community that we saw as openly as we do now. I do think fundamentalism increased throughout my life as well. We didn't see as many fundamentalists when we were kids. we just, and the ones that did exist, because of course they were there, we just saw them as crazies. You know, remember when somebody had come to the house that was quite conservative or quite fundamentalist, like had kind of a fundamentalist mindset. You know, someone from the family would go, "Oh, look, he's coming. Either cover your hair or just go inside if you don't want to." There was no pressure to kind of believe or do those things. But then I went back to Islam when I got engaged. Yeah, I felt that too, Hassan. When I first ate pork, I thought I was going to get struck down by lightning. And that was years after leaving Islam. I left Islam when I was 15, and then the second time when I was 19. And the first time I ate pork was in my 20s. I think I was 24 the first time I ate pork, and I couldn't sleep that night because I thought something awful was going to happen to me. But the indoctrination around pork starts much, much younger. If you think about when you're a child, you're not going to go out and drink, you're not going to go out and have sex. So that's not something they talk to you about until you much, much later on in your life. Food is obviously a much, much bigger part of life. You're much, much more conscious of what you should and shouldn't be eating. And you need to know, even as a child, that you can't eat pork. So the kind of indoctrination around pork starts very, very young. But I've also seen this in vegetarians that have not eaten meat for many years, or even a year. Within a year, this can happen. I was vegetarian myself. I remember this happening, where you start seeing meat as disgusting. Like if you were to accidentally eat any meat product that you probably would have eaten before, you feel physically sick. So we kind of develop that disgust quite quickly and easily. Where these children are being indoctrinated from a really, really young age around pork, they grow up feeling
Is it indoctrination, or is it just cultural conditioning? Because I know in different cultures they don't eat different things. For example, I tried to teach my kids not to eat meat for ethical reasons, but it was just difficult because we're so used to it. It's so much a part of a palate, you know what I mean? And like for example, my mom and her family, they'll just never eat pork, and it's like considered disgusting. It's not like a good example, I think, is my mom. Like she's not very religious, but she won't eat pork. And like me, even after leaving Islam, it took me a long time to undo the disgust sort of aversion to it. Kind of like how in some cultures, you know, they'll eat eggs, like we eat eggs and, you know, fried eggs or whatever. But in some cultures, for example, Philippines, they have this balut, which is like duck embryo or something. It's a very, like if you look at a picture of it, it's very gross looking. It has like, it's like a partially grown embryo chicken or something, right? And to me that's like gross. To them it's a delicacy, it's delicious, right? So the pork thing as well, it's you know, obviously it comes from religion, but it's become a part of the culture. Is it really indoctrination, or is it just like a cultural aversion?
I
You know what I
guess we'll
mean?
call it. I guess we call it indoctrination because it comes under the umbrella of religion. If it was just a cultural conditioning, it wouldn't be done because of the religion. It would be done because of the cultural kind of conditioning. Because you know, there's that thing of I remember when I was growing up, my mum telling me about her dad used to eat testicles, like goat
Yeah,
testicles. Found that disgusting. So
yeah,
culturally, there's that difference. However,
yeah,
you know, in Pakistan they do that, it's halal, they can eat it, it's
yeah.
fine. We wouldn't do that in the UK. So that's the cultural distinction. The reason we call it indoctrination in terms of pork and what happens within the religious context and religious communities is because it's done under the umbrella of religion.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, it's true. It's definitely it's hard to overcome too if you just never had it, right? If you've never had pork. I didn't think I was going to be hit by lightning or anything, but when I had it, I was like, the first time I bought it, I just had to throw it in the garbage. I couldn't eat it. I had a little bite. I'm like, even the smell of it, the like, it's just difficult. And I think some people don't understand. Some people, they just want to have bacon when they leave Islam. It's become like almost like a joke. Like I left Islam for bacon. But the majority of ex-Muslims, like, no, they don't eat bacon, or they do, but it took them a long time to kind of adjust to it. You
It's
know?
kind of a quite a common trope, isn't it? You left Islam so that you could do this, this, and
Yeah,
this.
yeah,
Um, I mean, one could say that I probably left Islam for cock, because
Yeah.
I found a guy that I really, really liked, and I
Yeah.
did want to, have sex. However, that's not necessarily something that you do for the sake of leaving Islam.
Yeah.
There's still people that leave
Yeah.
religion
Yeah.
and then still don't do any of the things that the religion would have
Yep.
forbidden. I know people that have left Islam that don't drink. I know people that have left Islam that still don't eat pork. And because it's easier, sometimes they become vegetarian. I kind of noticed that as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
Um, within the community, within the ex-Muslim community, there is a little bit of bullying and goading as well in some ways, that you should be drinking, that you should
Yeah.
be trying. If you're not willing to do that, that there's something wrong with you, because maybe you haven't fully left Islam.
Yeah.
There's not necessarily that kind of understanding that this is their journey, it's got nothing to do with you. So yeah, I certainly think that there's that part of it going on as well.
Yeah, and you know what? I think that again, that's going to go into what we're going to talk about later, which is the whole identity thing, the ex-Muslim identity, and yeah, you have a good point on that. But I'm going to save that point about what you just said about goading, ex-Muslims to drink and eat pork and all that. I'm going to save that for when we get to the identity politics. So let's continue your story then. What was the second time? The second time you left Islam. So you came back to Islam for marriage purposes. But like
Yeah.
people would have assumed you were Muslim anyways. Like, did you have to like come back to Islam? Like, if I had a Muslim name, I left Islam, and then I just got married, no one would know, right?
Yeah. Well, so nobody actually knew that I was an atheist.
Yeah, exactly.
That was very private for a long time. And kind of one of the wonders of living in a Western liberal democracy is that
Yeah.
at home you can live the life that your family expect you to live, and then outside you get to do a little bit of what you want. So, for example, my parents thought I had college 5 days a week, every day, 9 to 5, whereas actually I only had college for one day a week. So I just used to go out and do the things that I wanted to do
Oh
in
yeah,
those other 4 days.
that's
But
a good
yeah,
plan
no,
actually.
yeah, exactly. It's a
You
little
have to come
trick.
up with these mechanisms, I guess, to live in that sort of situation where your family has a certain expectation on you, and you have your own beliefs, and especially as a woman, I guess, right? Even more so as a woman, I would say, because a Muslim man isn't expected to have the same limitation and as a woman, right?
There's no restrictions. I mean, for some families that are very, very conservative, they might put those restrictions on their sons too.
Oh yeah.
However, sons always do have a little bit more wiggle room than daughters. In my family's instance, for example, my grandparents would be very, very controlling of all three of their sons in the same way as they would have done with their daughters, where they would have to justify where they're going, why they're, going, what they're wearing, etc. And whereas some families I've seen it within the community who would have a completely double standard for their daughters and their sons, and I see the kind of breakdown from the women afterwards.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, no. So I led this kind of double life. Was taken to Pakistan, got engaged in Pakistan, and it was kind of like a coerced engagement rather than a forced engagement, where quite a lot of emotional blackmail was applied. But in the end, I knew that it was going to solve quite a lot of problems in the family if I went along with it. So I did that, and before I went out,
And how old were you?
so it was on the border of my 19th birthday, so I
Oh
was 18.
wow, you were young.
So, yeah, yeah. So it's kind of I went out and did that, um, and came back after getting engaged, and realized that I was going to have to be far more religious, far more well behaved according to their rules. So I withdrew from friends and kind of like my own social sphere. Um, and started researching what my role as a woman would be within Islam, what my role as a wife would be, what my role as a mother would be. And then from that, I continued to research about Islam, because the first time I left Islam, it was a very, I was ignorant. I was innocently ignorant. I didn't actually care what
Mm,
Islam said. It was just boring to me.
yeah.
I really interest. Not only that, the other thing was that it didn't really provide any answers. Whenever I asked questions, I didn't have a sufficient answer, so I needed to find something a bit more interesting, something that I could engage with a bit better. And it was just that simplistic. There was two things that I remember specifically that stood out in my mind. One was God's family, and the other was that there's always this discussion about rape and sexual violence within families and communities that are more controlling and have this kind of honor-based ethos. So of course, naturally, being a Muslim family, I was going to look to Islam for a response to what happens when somebody gets raped. But there wasn't a response. I didn't get any answers to that. So those sort of things probably festered as I was younger. However, ultimately, it was just a case of boredom. At the age of 19 when I left, so I was engaged, and then I spent about 6 to 9 months researching, reading, completely isolating myself and figuring out what my roles and responsibilities as a wife would be, reading the texts, and then realizing that I couldn't really be part of something that didn't give women full equality. Now, as a 19-year-old, I didn't read that and think that Islam allows wife beating, and I'm not happy with that. My young mind kind of thought, well, if I'm disobedient and he gets to beat me, if he's disobedient, I should get to beat him up. Right?
Yeah.
So that was my kind of line of thinking. It wasn't that nobody should be beaten up because I was young.
Yeah.
I just thought, well, I should be able to beat him up. I should be able to control him. I should be able to have 4 husbands if I want, right?
Yeah.
So it was a case of like, I want like for like. And if I'm not going to get that, then I don't think this is the place for me.
Mm-hmm. And like instinctively that makes sense. I mean, if you're looking at equality, or if you're looking at something that should be fair, then why should it all be leaning towards the men? Why is it that men can say divorce, and they can just why do men get all the power? Why do they get to unilaterally end the marriage? Why do they get to be the ones to get double the inheritance of their sister? Why is it that they get to beat the wives in whatever circumstance that the Quran specifies? It's a good question. I mean, you can say it was naive, but it definitely is something worth questioning, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think if you're looking for equality, and if like Islam for years has been preaching that it gives you equality, you can't really. I don't think it's not very convincing when the literature itself tells you that that's not the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Then where do you go to? Because you're going straight to source. The only way is the way is out. But it's not even like often, and I've said this a few times actually, the problem isn't just the fact that he's allowed to hit you. Like this, there's a verse in the Quran that a lot of women become a lot of women leave because of that verse, the wife beating verse. But that bit isn't the issue, because if you talk about that in a Western liberal democracy like Britain, and you say that Islam allows wife beating, well, thankfully we've got protection under the law for that. The problem in that verse is the first bit. The second bit is more of a problem in other countries, in Muslim majority countries, because the beginning right to the end really, really empowers and emboldens any man who wants to beat his wife. But
Yeah.
the beginning of the verse in this country is what makes it a problem. The fact that right at the beginning they're saying the man is the provider, the controller, the maintainer. The fact that feminists have missed that is a cause for alarm for me, because they're supposed to be like fighting the patriarchy, but I'm not convinced by that anymore.
So I was gonna say, like, even if there is protection under the law in Britain for women not to be beaten by their wives, couldn't you argue that a lot of Muslim women would not go to the police because the husbands are just implementing what God allowed? So why would they go to a kafir judge and say my husband beat me, when actually, well, God himself said it's okay to do so? Because and they might self-rationalize it away by saying that I deserved it, I did something wrong, I mean, And let's just say it's not for, I mean, there could be all sorts of reasons why, you know, domestic abuse happens, but like she might justify it away and say that, well, you know, it's my fault, right? And
Mm.
the Quran makes that worse, because if that didn't exist in the Quran, if the Quran said do not beat your wives, then she would feel empowered to like to you know, to go and talk to the judge or the police or whatever. But what you've done now is you set up a situation where not only the man feels that it's his right to do so, the woman feels that it's his right to do so as well, you know?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, so having worked in domestic abuse, I know that every woman says that. When somebody's been telling you every day that this is your fault whilst they're doing it, then you believe it. So take that religious element out of it. Um, every perpetrator tells every victim that they're beating them because it's their fault. The additional layer within the Islamic context is that they have a book that tells them that they can do it. And Christianity has the same sort of principle. Christianity has the rule of thumb, so you can beat your wife with a stick no bigger than your thumb. However, excuse me,
And
if we
stick no
had
bigger than your thumb, like this tiny little stick like that.
so I mean my thumb's probably a bit different to your thumb though, to be honest. So
Okay.
this is the other thing, right? So that
But you
becomes
can
subjective.
barely hold it then if it's that tiny. Does that even make sense?
So whose thumb, right? But this is what I mean. This is why religious laws tend to be a little bit ridiculous, because they're always subjective. Like the rule of thumb, that if she disobeys you, all of those kind of guidelines, they can be interpreted by the reader however they wish to interpret them. So that's one thing. But also, in terms of what you mentioned in terms of legal protection, well, that's the responsibility of the state to ensure that the law is applied equally to every citizen and every resident. Well, part of what we haven't had is exactly that. What we've had is the community themselves asking for separate different treatment, and then we've had the wider society going, okay, they want their own courts, they want their own treatment, they don't want the law applied fairly. So you've got that happening from both places, but the victims of these crimes tend to just want to know that they're going to be safe. That's it. And of course you have victims that say it's my fault, but
Mm.
we know enough about domestic abuse and intimate partner violence to know that when somebody's been told repeatedly that they're worthless and that they deserve it, that they're going to parrot that back. That is part of the therapeutic work that you do with them, so that they understand that this isn't their fault, that they are repeating what their perpetrator said. Because, you know, before they met that perpetrator, they wouldn't have been saying such things.
Hmm. And you actually work in this. You have an organization you founded for this very reason called Gloucester Sisters. Can you tell us why you did that and why you founded this organization? I'm just trying to find the news story on it.
Yeah, so the organization specializes in harmful traditional practices. So it was never set up to be a support service. It was only set
Oh.
up. They're called second tier services. So we deliver training, frontline training. We create policies. We do research. We do that kind of thing. We have done some client work as well. However, it was never really primarily set up to do client work, because there's mainstream services that get the funds and resources to do that work. So what I want to see is them taking up that slack. I don't really like hearing the excuse from mainstream services that because this is a separate crime, that a separate service needs to be dealing with it, as in, like, so this is something that affects brown women, so we need a service set up by brown women to work with brown women. Because if you've experienced some of these things, you actually don't care who's giving you the support, provided that you're being made safe.
Yeah.
I think it's offensive that they think that because it's a brown woman experiencing the crime, that a white woman can't do that work.
Yeah, that's
um,
silly.
we kind of see an increasing culture of that,
Oh my God.
new people deal with your own issues, particularly when you know the generic services do have the funding to do that work. So part of my role would be to upskill existing professionals to understand the kind of sort of minor differences in the community. But like you said, right, that when there's a victim who has been beaten by her husband because Islam says so, she's saying the same things that a domestic abuse victim would say. It's exactly the same principle. So part of my job is to kind of tell organizations that it's you guys that have got the problem. You guys want to fob this off on somebody else. That sometimes victims don't want to see somebody who's from their own community. Like I've had stuff happen to me. If I saw somebody from the same background as me, I would be suspicious. I wouldn't feel safe speaking to them because I don't know who they're related to. I don't know if they're going to go back and say something to my family. Certainly when I was younger, I definitely thought like that.
Mhm.
So it's this kind of color matching or religion matching that we see in organizations. I'm quite concerned about that, actually.
So a couple of people are asking where that comes from, that expression. Sorry, that rule about beating your wife. I just Googled it. It says the phrase rule of thumb entered English in the mid 1600s and referred to a method based on experience. It was first appeared in a sermon by James Durham, a Presbyterian minister in Glasgow. So in the 1600s, they were giving khutbahs, sermons, the Christian, that it was okay to beat your wife, and they were using biblical references. Now, obviously, I don't have the references, and that's not the point of this conversation. But yeah, you made a lot of, just to get that out of the way, because some people were asking. So based on what you said, it doesn't necessarily, I mean, there's no point having specifically a service for brown women that is run by brown women, to help with domestic abuse, and you don't need a different one for black women and white women. It like a general service can tackle all of the issues more effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. And if there's something that they don't understand, then go and seek the training for it. So that's something that we would provide. Gloucestershire Sisters would provide that. And we have trained, I think, about 800 professionals now since we started. And we continue to do training. I think Corona's kind of got in the way of that a little bit now. However, if they don't understand it, that's not a good enough excuse not to support that client group, or to completely ignore that client group. Because you know, migrants have been in this country now for nearly 7, 8 decades. To say that we still don't understand their issues, well, that's the issue of the organizations now. It's not the issue of the client.
Yeah. So when you wanted to, I mean, when you started this organization, did you find that it actually had the impact you wanted it to have, and you did the training and all of that? What was it? Are you still involved with that to this day?
Yeah, I mean, things have improved quite a lot. Locally, things have improved because we started off as quite a local organization. We partner up with like nearby counties. We don't kind of do countrywide work, but yeah, definitely. Receptiveness has been much better over the years, and learning has improved. People are just cracking on with the job. So there was resistance when we first started, partly because it was just so new to them. But yeah, things have improved a lot, and hopefully they'll
It's good to
continue
know.
improving.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I think
sorry.
that's the story of humanity in general. We're getting better and better at these things. And, old religious texts didn't help. They didn't solve these problems. They didn't improve the situation. They may have improved the situation at one point. Like, for example, in the 7th century, it's possible that Islam improved some things for women. I don't think it was definitely a blanket improvement. It made some things a lot worse, for sure. And what we're seeing today is, with the Enlightenment, with the humanism, we find that things are getting better for women, for children, for animals. In general, the world is a better place than it ever was before in terms of human rights. Now, back to your story. So what ended up happening with that sort of arranged marriage that you had to go through when you were really young? It was coerced on you, and you went back to Islam. You did all this research on how to be a good Muslim woman, a good Muslimah. Whatever happened after all that?
So yeah, I just I told my family that I couldn't marry him. And it took us quite a while to break off the engagement, but eventually we got there. And then that was it. I kind of went off to university, um, and that was it really. So that was my
That's
journey.
good. I mean, that's a happy story because it could have been, obviously if you actually went ahead. I sometimes get people asking me for advice, and there's another lady that was in a similar situation as you, but she was in a conservative family, and she was thinking maybe I should just get married, and that would have been like, and she was ex-Muslim, and I told her that I don't think you should go ahead with it because it's not going to make things better. It's going to make things much, much, much more messy, and then if you have kids on top of it, I mean, it's just gonna spiral. Like if you want your freedom, getting married to a Muslim man is probably not the best way to do it. It could be fine. Like if you were actually choosing this marriage out of love or whatever, and you have something in common. But if it's just an arranged marriage, which is set up with a specific goal in mind, which is to set up a Muslim family or whatever, and it's not going to go well for you because it's just going to make it worse. And then if you want to get out of that, now you have extra hoops to jump out of. Whereas if you're single, I mean, there's less things to deal with, right? So I'm happy for you that you didn't end up going down that path. So
I
so
mean, I have to say, like, the process is hard, right? Going up against your family and saying, I don't want to get married, I want to live on my own, I want to go and do something that you don't want me to do is hard, right? But you're right, it's harder to be in a relationship where you're not going to be able to do the things that you want to do, where you're going to be completely restricted. That is really, really dangerous. And I think the trouble with Islam is, I'll give you an example. My partner, he's not from a Muslim background. His family were Christian. He's not a Christian. And when we met, we kind of talked about this. I said to him, if I went back to Islam, would you still stay with me? And he said, yeah, of course I would. And I sat there for a minute and I said to him, I don't think I'd stay with you. But not because I planned on leaving him. You know, we've got a very,
because you
very
can,
loving relationship. I adore him, right?
yeah,
But I know what Islam
yeah,
tells you.
you can't be with him,
Exactly.
yeah.
So there is a difference, you know. I have heard of interfaith marriages that have worked, but if it was just a case of those two individuals, I think it'd be different, right? The problem that we have is we come with community baggage. So the Muslim community is always in your business, always wanting to be involved, always wanting to question your actions, your family life, what you're doing inside the house, what you're doing outside of the house, and it's that creates the pressure. Like, I was speaking to somebody a few days ago, who her family weren't religious. They were once upon a time. Gradually, they became religious. And I said to her, did they live in the community? And she said, no, actually, we would dip in and out of family stuff, but we lived out of the community, out of the family entirely. And I was like, well, that's it. That's the key. Because it's all about the aunties and the uncles and the cousins and, you know, the extended family and community that kind of continue that pressure cooker, like that pressure pot that we've got around us. If that pressure wasn't there, I think even leaving Islam from our communities wouldn't really be a big deal.
Yeah, indeed. There's a lot more to it, and that it just complicates the whole thing, right? I'm lucky in a sense, just to share my experience. When I left Islam, my wife is Canadian. Her family's not Muslim. She was a convert as well. So we didn't have in-law issues. They were happy I left Islam. They didn't care. I mean, they're like, okay, good for you. I mean, they're probably happy because I wasn't insisting on Islamic stuff for the family anymore. Like, yeah, if guys want to go out, if they want to go out for a beer, I don't have a problem with that. Whatever, all of that stuff, going out for Halloween, like we're more normative, let's say normative family. Like we're doing what everyone else does. Now we're not avoiding, and I always wanted to take my kids for Halloween. I mean, just it's a small thing, but couldn't do it because I know it's fun for the kids. They love it. They always get excited, especially younger kids, like around the age of 6 or 4. they love Halloween. It's like a really fun thing for them. I loved it too when I was a kid. My family wasn't religious like I was today, so my mom took me out for Halloween. She didn't have a problem with it, but me, I wouldn't take my kids out. I put them in Islamic school. I made them pray at home. I couldn't eat at McDonald's. Like all of these little things that people kind of Muslims sometimes laugh at and say, "Oh, you want to go to McDonald's? Oh, wow! Like what a big reason to leave Islam." That's not why I left Islam, but you do miss out on these things. Your family misses out on these things. So, but I'm lucky that I didn't have that whole dicey issue of like, families getting involved and your in-laws trying to tell you what to do and your in-laws telling you to leave your husband because he's
Mm.
murtad. I mean, that is probably the worst thing. I had people tell my wife, her Muslim friends, and of course they're just friends. So what say do they have? They can only tell. They can't force her to do anything. They told her leave him because he's murtad. He's going to spoil the kids or whatever. And thankfully that didn't happen because that would have been a dumb reason to leave me. I'm still going to be the parent. I'm still going to be involved in their lives. It's not gonna. They're not. I'm not going to disappear from the planet just because I'm
Mm.
not, there in the same relationship with the mother. So, I'm glad for all that. It can get messy and I totally get like how complicated this is and how difficult it can be. Leaving Islam is always tough. It's just never easy. Maybe leaving any religion, but especially with how involved the families are and everything, makes things so messy. And again, we're lucky we're in the UK. You're in the UK. I'm in Canada, so there was no Islamic law, right? You wanted to say something?
Yeah, no, sorry, I just keep meaning to say because it's interesting. It is the family dynamic that's the major issue. They are the ones reporting their loved ones in Islamic countries to the authorities. I've worked on a case before where a young girl, the families themselves took them to the police she was a Saudi young girl. She was
Jeez.
kept in prison. Um, so
Because she's
the
having doubts, or she left
yeah,
Islam.
yeah, oh, yeah.
They took her to the
But
police,
yeah, they took her to
and
the police.
she's like a teenager.
She was in her, yeah, she was in her teens at that point, but thankfully
Jeez.
she came back, and then she just kept it a secret. She kept it a secret for years until she managed to leave the country. She had to build that trust up with her family again. But this is what I mean, right? The family component is a major issue. You can't just talk about the Islam issue as if that's nothing, as if the rest of it isn't nothing. The rest of the complicated discussion is really, really important too. The fact that family members are kind of policing each other is quite dangerous too. And look, there is a difference in this kind of sphere. My partner, when he decided he didn't believe in God anymore, came downstairs, told his mum, I'm not a Christian anymore. I don't believe in God. And she went, all right, son, I still love you.
Yeah.
That was the entirety of the conversation. She didn't have to go to the church and say, my son needs to be exercised because he's lost his way,
Yeah.
or didn't take him to the police because he needs to get his head chopped off because he's left the faith. The kind of the difference is very, very extreme, but I think you need to drag Islam kicking and screaming into the 21st century now.
Mhm.
It's fascinating because I had a really nice discussion with a group of Muslim men a few weeks ago. They're all Pakistani, excuse me, all of them actually. Three of them were based here. One was in Canada, one was in Pakistan. And as I was talking to them, I said, look, it's your faith. You need to reform it. You guys keep getting stuff. You guys keep messing things up. One person saying that you can beat your wife, another one saying that you can't beat your wife. Your interpretations are all over the place. It's not my problem because I'm not part of your faith anymore. But this is your problem. Your religion needs a reformation. And it was fascinating because after we were on this call for over 2 hours, as they were hanging up, they said, inshallah, that'll never happen. What you want will never ever happen. And I was like, I have no interest in what you do with your faith. Believe, disbelieve, what you believe is none of my business. I think, provided no harm is being done, I don't actually care, quite frankly. However, there is a really strong argument for reforming Islam, a really, really strong argument for reforming Islam, but the resistance to it is what keeps them in the dark ages, essentially.
Hmm. You know, I just want to say one thing. You know, when we talk about someone reporting the teenage daughter to the police, do you think that's just an intimidation technique? Like they don't actually expect her to be jailed, or is it like they actually don't, they want the kid to go to jail? What do you think? My guess is they're just bullying her, and they've escalated it, you know, to a level where, because I remember one time, I mean, it's kind of embarrassing, where, you know, one of my kids shoplifted, and, you know, we told him, if you do this again, it happened a couple times, you're going to go to jail. And we actually took him to the police station. And I told the police officer, I need your help. Can you talk to him? Because we don't want him going down this path. Tell
Yeah.
him how bad this is, right? And we were scaring him. Obviously, he wasn't admitting, he wasn't like, this wasn't like we wanted him to go to jail. Like the police officer was smiling when I went to talk to him because he understood what was going on. And I'm like, stop smiling. Be serious. This is like I want him to get the point, right? So, you know, that's, you know,
There's a valid point there, right? Because what you're feeling in terms of wanting to ensure later on in your child's life, they don't shoplift, they don't get themselves into trouble, that they
yeah,
become good, whole citizens. That is the same feeling that somebody who is a devout believer has about their child leaving Islam.
yeah,
I've had a
exactly.
lot of moments with my mum where she's like, I need to face my God and you're telling me you've left your faith. Right. So to her, the panic is the same, that her children are leaving the faith and she needs to be able to do something. Now, in this country, she doesn't have refuge in the law, right? However, in other countries, they do. The problem the problem is that the law isn't going to stand there and laugh like they did in your story. They're going to go, oh, this is actually a crime.
Mhm.
And we don't need the proof. You're the proof here. You're stood here telling me that she's left Islam or she's doubting Islam. You're the proof here. You know, with you kind of you could turn up with the sweets or whatever, and kids do that. Like that, it's part of their learning process, really. Um, but in this instance, it's much more serious. The kind of the parental concern might be the same, but the consequences are going to be much more serious, and we need to be a bit more worried about it, really.
Do you know what happened in her case? Like what was, did she get a warning, or what
She's out,
happened?
she's out of the country now, thankfully. She's out of the country. She's safe. Um,
But what did
yeah,
the
so
police do? Did they
uh,
actually do anything, or?
I think she was kept in prison for a while. I don't know the full details of the story.
Okay.
It was a little while ago now.
Jeez.
Yeah, I don't remember the full ins and outs of the story. All I know now, thankfully, she's safe. Um, yeah, she's got a lovely, happy life now. Does still
Wonderful.
feel sad, unfortunately, because that kind of tearing away from everything that's familiar to you, I think that has an impact in itself. However, the strength in that woman is unreal, to have crossed the entire world, to get away from everything, to kind of understand the danger, to know how to get herself safe. I would have died, to be honest. So she was an inspiration.
She got in, her inner strength came out, right, when she was pushed to the wall. I mean, that's amazing. And that's you know, we somehow, you know, humans, we have a way of surviving, and we find our ways through the dark. Not everyone does, but it's always inspiring to hear stories like that of young women and young men who escape these brutal regimes and who manage to get out of them, to manage to free themselves from the faith. And that's why we need also Western liberal democracies to support us in these things, because it's a real issue. Like you said, it's a real issue. If you're an ex-Muslim in these countries, you can be killed, you can be jailed, you can be shunned. And I think it does happen here too. Like when you talked about the story of your partner and how he told his mom and his mom still loves him, that was a kind of the example with me too, when I told my mom, because my family's very, the liberal Muslims, right? Even my mom's Sunni, she's still very liberal. And she's like,
Mm.
well, you know, for me, God is something that I use to you know, deal with the stresses in life, and I pray to God and whatever. and I want that for you too. But she doesn't. I don't think she believes in hell. I don't think she believes I'm going to hell. She's just like, okay. And same with my dad. My dad is a smiley. He believes in the smiley stuff. He's passed away now, but like he had the same reaction. He's like, okay, I mean, I believe in God. If you don't want to believe in God, that's fine. On the
Mm.
other hand, you do have, not to contradict what you're saying, because what you're saying is true, but we also do have some Christians who have the similar experience. I've talked to ex-Mormons, ex-Jehovah's Witnesses who have been shunned. And I haven't talked to any ex-Jew yet. I'd love to talk to someone that no longer follows the Jewish religion and the experiences they have. But I spoke to a lady, her name is Gail, and she lives in the deep South in Tennessee, and her experiences leaving Islam were just like an ex-Muslim. Like
Mm.
she was a former Southern Baptist. She lost her husband, right?
Right.
She broke up with her husband. The church, obviously, I mean, we didn't go into too much detail, but it was traumatic. And so
Hmm.
she joined this organization called Recovering from Religion to help people. And there was another individual I talked to from Recovering from Religion as well, Eric Wells. He was
Hmm.
also motivated to support people and to do this support work for people that are leaving Christianity, because we don't sometimes, as ex-Muslims, we don't realize that like a lot of Christians go through the same thing as well. And in some ways, because I don't know about UK, but I know in the US, Christianity has more of a stranglehold on the government in some ways, and Christian values, like the whole abortion thing, anti-abortion, the whole gay rights, gay marriage, the whole stem cell research, funding for, I mean, there's a lot of political issues where the Christian right is hampering, progress, and actually stopping liberty of people.
Yeah.
And this is happening in the US more than it. I mean, Muslims in Western countries are less of an issue to the values. Although you might counter me on that with the whole LGBT thing that happened, where there was a big woo-ha in the UK. Muslims wanted to take the kids out of school. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, just on a few of your points.
Hmm.
Yeah, you're right in terms of this is where I think the identity politics discussion does come in, actually, because yes, there are other faiths that when people leave them, they end up losing everything. What you'll find is the same component exists of very, very controlling families and communities that have a kind of a very nosy kind of behavior within those communities. I don't know if you watched the film, I think it was called The Apostate, about an ex-JW. The
No.
same sort of thing, they have very, very closed off communities. And if you leave, you're excommunicated from the entire family, the entire community, that the faith leaders tell you that you're not to speak to your own children, that kind of thing. So it's exactly the same kind of pattern. Just because they don't do the last thing of executing that person doesn't mean that it's not just as awful. So that there's that one thing. On the topic of the no outsiders program, so again, this is complicated, right? There's several
What is that? No outsiders?
yeah, so No Outsiders was the education program that these protesters were protesting about, the
Oh, okay.
package of No Outsiders, essentially saying that nobody should be left outside. So this is a program where if you look at the actual skeletal program, it doesn't seem that problematic. And also in terms of the violence against women sector, we've been campaigning for decades to get information and advice around healthy and unhealthy relationships, sex and consent into schools, right?
Hmm.
So, so that on that thing, on that kind of note, I think it's good. Excuse me, education about the Equalities Act would be brilliant as well, right? That these are what protected characteristics are, that everybody should be treated with respect and equally, etc., etc. The protesters were protesting because they thought that by giving this education to young people, you were going to turn everyone gay, right?
As
So
if that's how it works.
well, you should be laughing because it sounds as ridiculous as it is as ridiculous as it sounds,
Yeah.
right? You don't. teach a child about sexuality and they decide that they're gonna change. I don't think it quite works like that. So that's one thing. The other complex area of this discussion. So on the one hand, there were protests going on, and there was a lot of outcry from the ex-Muslim community that, you know, we need to shut these people down. Actually, I disagree. I was quite glad that they were out protesting publicly, because then we know where they stand. If you're for freedom of speech, even if you dislike what they're saying, it's really crucial that you let them speak. And we've lived in these communities, Abdullah. We know if they weren't having these discussions publicly, where else are they going to have these discussions?
Yeah.
And then what is it going to fester to? Then what we would have is an Orlando style shooting, because they're going to be radicalizing their youth and their young people into getting angry. And then also you'll have self-hating young people who might be lesbian or gay, or, you know, etc. So there's that one component. So I do think that some form of RSE education is vital. I do think that teaching about the Equalities Act, again, is vital. Is that where I'm concerned is where school children are being taught that you can identify in and out of your sex. That if you are a boy and you like playing with dolls, or you're a girl and you like football, it might mean that you're the opposite sex. That's when I have an issue with it. So actually, there was a big, complex conversation that needed to be had, and we've only had like a few minutes of that conversation, so we're not even having a very complicated discussion about it. But there were several complex elements to this discussion that we didn't manage to have, because you had several kind of crazies pop up to kind of shout each other down. And then our mainstream media have a habit of turning up with a camera and showing a few, showing snippets of a few kind of shouters. Those that shout the loudest get their voices heard, and everybody else doesn't really get to come to the table and have a sensible reasonable discussion about this. And the whole program was actually quite complicated. There's quite a lot going on. There were elements that were really good. There were elements that I would question. There were elements that there was a lot of misinformation about. You know, the protesters were like, we don't want our kids knowing about gay sex, etc. However, at no point was anybody going, and this is how a man has sex with a man. That nobody was going to teach a primary school child that. But a lot of the nuance of the discussion it didn't happen because of the nut jobs on all sides.
And I'm just gonna say, I'm not sure, and I don't think the Orlando club shooting, I know initially there was some speculation that he was a self-hating gay or something like that, but it seems like at the end of the day he was just an extremist. He claimed to be doing this as a revenge for US airstrikes or something. So I don't know. I think what could happen if you don't, this gets into a whole discussion on free speech. If we shut down free speech, then what would happen is it'll continue underground, and these values will continue to be there, and they'll still be taught to the Muslims in the community, the gay hate and all that. Maybe not to the extent of a shooting, but definitely it'll continue to harm progress in the society. And this goes into a bigger issue of religious morality versus secular morality. As Abdullah Gondal, my good friend, stated, the whole point of religious morality is to please some god, some entity, some other entity. It has nothing to do with, helping humans per se. It might have some overlap with that, but at the end of the day, the goal is all about pleasing God. So when it comes to, for example, many Muslim scholars believe, and this is probably a mainstream opinion, that according to Quran 65:4, you're allowed to marry a child, okay? And based on the fact that Muhammad married Aisha, not just the fact that the hadith says she was 9, but the Quran itself talks about divorcing a prepubescent women. Now, there's another minority opinion that says it's not talking about prepubescent women, but women who no longer menstruate. But the majority opinion, including the tafsir, says that this is about women who have not menstruated, and talks about divorce, and it talks about... So anyways, the point is, Muslim scholars have fought marriage reform in Muslim countries. They have fought it. They have said, no, you can marry children because of Islam. And this is religious morality at its best or at its worst, whatever you want to call it. Because at the end of the day, it's not about, but now secular morality comes and says, no, you cannot marry children because they cannot consent, their minds are not developed, they don't understand, there's a lot of health risks. And, for example, the fistula, which happens in Africa a lot, it's not an Islamic issue per se, but it's an issue with child marriage, where a woman is not physically big enough, her hips are not developed enough, excuse me, to bear the child safely. She's physically able to get pregnant because evolution doesn't care. It's not perfect. The process is not perfect. She can get pregnant, but then she gets a big hole inside her and it causes all of these. Now we can easily fix this with, for example, C-sections or whatever. Before C-sections existed, so many women died. So many children died. Now we fixed this problem with evolution. It's not, God didn't design us humans to, this is not a God didn't design us, period. This is just a flawed process of evolution. And that's what we find. And we humans, we're constantly fixing these things. And so we don't want to have C-sections on little children who are having babies. We don't want little children having babies, period. Right. And so that's why we have abortions, and that's why we have C-sections, and that's why we have, laws protecting children from getting into these sort of relationships. So this is a difference between secular morality and religious morality. The goals are different, the values are different, and the end goal is to make the world a better place, right? So I think that is a big difference. Now, I want to ask you, and you said something about subjective interpretations. That's another problem with religions. There is no real right interpretation, because every single interpretation we have is always going to be a subjective opinion. Any translation of the Quran that you have is always going to be a subjective translation, because there's no such thing. I mean, a literal translation is meaningless because it's just words. You have to understand what the author is trying to convey, and you have to put context into that. So as soon as you put context, then you now have, and someone trying to understand it based on their lens, their understanding of the language, based on what the words might have meant. We don't even necessarily know what the words meant exactly back then. I mean, Lisan al-Arab is an effort towards preserving the meanings of the words. But then even then, do you really want to understand it the way they understood it, or you want to understand it in today's context? Because otherwise it's useless. It's not a 7th century manual. I mean, Muslims say it's not a 7th century manual. They say it's a manual for all times and all places, right? So if that's the case, well, now you have to interpret it. And as soon as you interpret it, now you're going to have problems. You're going to have human beings doing a best guess effort.
You'd think if, for me, like I always fall, I always kind of get stuck at this point. If it was a manual for all time, well, sexual violence is at an all-time high. Although we reporting of sexual violence, I should say, is at an all-time high, because sexual violence has always been there, but now we know about it, right? Surely, an all-knowing being would have had the foresight to know that sexual violence would happen, and would have put something to do with that in the Quran. If there is kind of one universal interpretation of this one book that everybody should know, well, if that was the case with books, we wouldn't have book clubs where people get together to talk about their perspective on a book. It just wouldn't happen, because that's what people do. 10 people can read the same piece of literature and interpret what they want from it, because people have a habit of reading things and interpreting it in a way that fits into their life or their biases or their kind of viewpoint. But you're right also in terms of, I think what needs to happen in the Islamic world is this tussle between East and West needs to stop, especially when it comes to just scientific evidence. Because the scientists, and I am no scientist, I've never claimed to be one, or it's not really something that I know a lot about. But in terms of science, what I do know is they're quite happy to keep reevaluating their data, their information, their experiments to learn along the way. Now, science has always kind of been under attack. The Illuminati were actually a secret a secret collective of scientists, because the church didn't want scientific evidence being popularized, because it would counter with some of the things that they were saying. And I don't know huge amounts about the history of that, so it'd be kind of a waste of time for me to talk massively about it. But science has always been under attack from faith. That's the point, because it does smash faith up. So it's, the kind of, I think what we need to get to a point of in the Islamic world is this east versus west, and science versus faith. Like if something new emerges that counters your point, it's not an attack on you, it's just new information. It's that simple. It's not a war that we're starting. This is new information that you should be considering and changing your opinion accordingly.
Mm-hmm. And I want to say, you said a lot of really interesting points. I'm trying to keep track of all of them. One of the things I wanted to say was, I think it was Bilal Phillips who said that if the interpretation of the Quran was done by Muhammad, if we had the tafsir, and we do have tafsir of him explaining certain verses, but very little. He said if we had the entire tafsir, then the Quran would be done and there wouldn't be any more way to interpret it in today's world. But what makes the Quran useful is that in every age, people are applying it to their lives. And that's why you have ijtihad and you have, scholars who come and reinterpret it. So the Quran is supposed to be for all times. If it wasn't, it would be useless. And so, this is kind of a problem where you have this book from the 7th century, definitely has 7th century values and norms and teachings. And people are trying to bring it into the 21st century. And now they have a problem because they have this dissonance between. And that's why I think we're finding people now saying Aisha was not 9. No, she was 18, because now they have a conflict between what they think is, their good values. And even if you watch, some comedies from like the 90s, they're so cringy. Some of them are like really awkward to watch, like Ace Ventura. It's making so much fun of trans. It just makes fun of, like, it's so awkward. And if you watch Matilda, like I was cringing because she's like doing child abuse. And this is a kid's movie. Now you wouldn't, it's done as a comedy, but she's like grabbing them from the hair and throwing them out the windows. And it's not funny. When you watch that, you're like, how is this funny? This is like, I'm telling my kids that I'm watching it, like, don't let someone do this to you. This is not acceptable. So
that's good. You see those things, and then that means it leads to a conversation. But because naturally society's developed,
yes,
like historical account is important. If it's comedy or if it's drama or if it's literature or if it's statues, the fact that we want. So there's two things, right? The fact that we want yesterday to understand what we were going to be like today is in itself a problem. But then the flip side of that is that we also can't have an outdated piece of literature that can apply to today as if it's yesterday. We just can't have that either.
Yeah, especially if you're putting it on a higher epistemological plane than the rest of evidence. So it's okay to say there's some good things in the Quran, and I want to take, I want to wash my ass or whatever it is that you like from Islam. That's fine, even if it's 7th century. But the difference is we secularists, we put everything on a level playing field. We say, well, judge it on its merits, not based on the fact that it's the word of God. When you have something claiming to be the word of God, it screws up everything, because now you have to, you're basically evaluating that as a source of truth. Sorry, you're not even evaluating it. You're using it as a source of truth, whereas it's not, and it's godly truth. It's not even like a human author. So that makes it even worse. Because if it was just another human author, we were like, yeah, well, Socrates got these things right about democracy and he got these things wrong. But now if Socrates claimed to be speaking to God, now suddenly it's like, oh no, everything he said is right. Even the wrong things he said are right. We have to find a way to make them wrong, make the wrong things right. It's so, and what you said about the us versus them mentality is so true. Not just science. This whole antagonism between Muslims and non-Muslims, not even between Muslims and non-Muslims, between Islam and its teachings towards the kuffar and towards the munafiq and the murtadeen, and it's just so ridiculous and it's so toxic and it's so harmful and hateful. You find it
Mm,
most strongly among Salafism,
mm,
let's say, not Salafism, and you find it even more extreme in, I now have a word for it, it's called Madkhali Salafism. So Madkhali Salafism is like the more right-wing Salafism, where even other Salafis are not Salafi enough, and we're finding this right now with Yasir Qadhi. So Yasir Qadhi has been cancelled by the Madkhali Salafis. Basically, the far right Salafis are canceling other Salafis, and it's a toxic, self-consuming ideology. But that's what Islam leads to when you try to be on the, you're either on the right manhaj or you're not. And even other
mm,
Muslims are under attack. And the same thing you find with jihadis. Basically, you can never be Muslim enough, because if they don't like you, you are now a kuffar, because
mm,
for example, Anwar Sadat was assassinated because he made a peace treaty with Israel. Somehow
mm.
he's not Muslim enough now because he did that. He's a kafir and he has to be killed. So it's just a toxic thing, putting religion at the basis of your society, as a basis for your values. And
Yeah,
Muslims will say, oh no, they're not true Muslims. But again, it's all subjective, right? At the end of the day,
yeah,
it's just,
yeah. But I
you're
think this is the thing, because I've actually heard this from ex-Muslims as well, funnily enough. If somebody is not Muslim enough, then they must be ex-Muslim. It's weird because that mentality, it seems, doesn't shift. If they had a kind of fundamentalist mindset when they were Muslim, they bring that with them when they leave the faith as well, which is interesting. But yeah, it's fascinating. I actually don't have a problem with people believing. I genuinely don't give a crap, provided that they don't impose things on me. Their beliefs, provided they keep them to themselves, I actually don't care at all. But I do think the harmful elements of any ideas do need to be challenged, the same way as we would do with a government that we think has some problematic policies, for instance.
Mhm,
That I'm massively against open borders because I think the impact it has on the workforce. I don't like globalization because of similar sort of things, how they reduce workers' rights and work, worsen working conditions, how it reduces salaries, etc. So I can talk about those issues and criticize my government if they're going to be championing that, or criticize a political party because they're going to be championing that. It's the same principle actually within Islam. This is the thing that I think the kind of more radical Muslims don't understand, is that if we're challenging the principles of Islam, it's not a personal attack on them. And if you are seeing it on as a personal attack, then I think it's about time to book an appointment with a therapist. Because if you can't have a conversation without seeing it as a personal attack, then you're not in a sensible position to be having dialogue with anybody, actually.
mhm. Yeah, and I want to say, okay, I just want to address one point here. I thought that was kind of funny. Tattoos, no wonder they were thrown out of Islam. These were never Muslims. They need a YouTube identity to gain views, so they call themselves ex-Muslims. Okay, this is a perfect way to now move into the whole ex-Muslim label. But before we talk about that, I just want to say one thing. I want to respond to one thing you said, which is not Muslim enough to
Mm.
ex-Muslims. I thought this was a very interesting point, and I want to talk about that. But before I do that, I want to make an appeal to everyone that's watching. I want to say thank you to everyone that subscribed. Thank you to my supporters. Thank you to all of the members on the channel, including Food and Religion, John Stopman, Exodus 21v20, and everyone else who I've not mentioned who is not here right now. I apologize for missing you, Food and Religion. But thank you guys and gals so much for your support, for everything that you've done to help me to get to this point. I do see this channel as a sort of responsibility to the world. Like I feel like I have a duty to use it for good, to make the world a better place, to have interviews and discussions like this, to shift the discourse in a good direction, to continue to counter bad dogma, bad ideas. And I really do appreciate all of you, also Ziaz Qureshi and all of the other mods as well and members. Thank you so much. Those of you who are new to the channel, please do subscribe. And if you can afford to support me financially, please do consider joining. as little as $2 a month, you can become a member. You get an icon next to your name, and the money does help. Thank you so much. Now, thank you, Sadia, for having this conversation. And we actually wanted to talk about identity politics. So now, well, first of all, I think this is hilarious because someone is saying if you don't have a tattoo, you're gonna leave, like you're not a true Muslim. So I don't have a tattoo. I might get one day. I don't know. But do you have anything to say to this person?
I mean, I've got lots of tattoos, but that wasn't the reason I left Islam. I actually, the very first tattoo I got, I was a Muslim when I got it. So I don't really know what that has to do with anything. But this is the problem, right? The kind of policing of the community is a problem. You know, the Muslims policing each other and then ex-Muslims policing each other. You know, that, for instance, I quite like Naats and Nasheeds. I still really like them. I like the ones that, particularly that have got music in them. Like I like Sami Yusuf. I think his voice is just
Yeah.
it's beautiful, right?
Allahu.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
he's beautiful. He's beautiful, and I
Yeah.
think he is beautiful himself as well.
Yeah.
I really like Qawwali, and lots of Qawwali is, yes, it's steeped in skepticism, but there's also a lot of religious kind of mentions and quotes and stuff. But then the ex-Muslim community are like, you know, you're listening to religious music, you're listening to kind of, well, what business is it of yours? Just because somebody has left the faith doesn't mean that they've now got to conform to what you want them to do. It seems like it's become quite cultish, just as cultish as it was when they were in the faith. It's interesting as well, because the other thing I have seen is people that leave a faith, they replace one prophet with another prophet. This kind of obsessing over Dawkins, or, you know, add the name of whoever they've kind of decided to obsess over.
Yeah.
Did you leave the faith so you could think for yourself, or just so you could replace you know, a religious god with an irreligious god? That's the other thing. And there's also there's a lack of, I think they pay lip service to being for freedom of speech. I'm not convinced by it. I heard a lot of ex-Muslims saying during the whole Birmingham protests, the no outsider protests, that we want to shut these people up, that these people shouldn't be speaking. And I think that if you're for freedom of speech, then you've got to stand for your opponent's right to speak, even if what they're saying sounds like poison to you. Just because you don't like it doesn't mean that you get to shut them up. Like we said, right? If they weren't saying it in public, they would have definitely been saying it in private. The other thing that for me was a bit of an issue within the ex-Muslim community was that they were quite willing to fall for this kind of self-identification issue. So if I identify as a man, then I am a man, when quite clearly I am a woman. So if you're for evidence and fact and reality, how then can you be falling for this trap? Now that doesn't mean that I'm not for, you know, the rights of transgender people. However, I'm not really willing to entertain fantasy but you know, seriously bad mental health. So within that kind of sphere, I saw quite a lot of ex-Muslims jumping on that too, because it's the new social justice movement and they want to still remain relevant. Now, transphobia is the new Islamophobia. You know, 5 years ago, possibly 10 years ago, criticizing Islam was, you know, socially it would have meant that you were completely finished. However, now that's easier. But now transphobia is the new Islamophobia. Criticizing anything under this kind of trans ideology it is akin to a crime. So it was fascinating to see that a lot of ex-Muslims jumped on that. The other thing was, Look, if you ask somebody who experienced racism what they want racism to end. They don't want the right to then become a racist, right?
Mm-hmm.
To hear people within that community wanting to be able to bash the other side was a problem for me. I saw a tweet this morning actually, and it said, "Can you imagine a gay khilafat where heterosexuals were stoned to death?" Um, and it kind of sat very uncomfortably with me because I tell you what, if you ask somebody who experienced homophobia 50 years ago what they want, all they would have said is that we want equality under the law. We want to be treated like a human. We want the homophobia to stop. They didn't want to then go and throw heterosexual people off buildings. The same things happening with the race discussion, the same things happening with the sex discussion, the same things happening with the LGBT discussion. And actually, I want it to stop. It's
Yeah.
really quite disgusting. If you think that the way to be released from your oppression is to oppress somebody else, then you're not actually dreaming about equality or freedom. You're dreaming about more oppression, which is never the answer, because then all you've got is another group of oppressed
Yeah.
people and another group of very, very upset, angry, discontented people.
I do think a lot of ex-Muslims. Okay, so first of all, it's very important what you're saying, and it's very difficult to say what you just said because there's a sort of expectation to toe the party line, even as an ex-Muslim, and I've seen this as well. And it's very difficult to criticize other ex-Muslims because we are supposed to stick together. The fact is really there's a small number of public activists.
Mm.
So if you, I mean, we didn't mention any names, but like I'm just saying in general, even without mentioning names, to even criticize what ex-Muslims do is very difficult if you're, especially if you're, like public figure of sorts.
Mm.
But it's very important so we don't end up like another cult. We do need to actually, if someone does something wrong, like there was a bigoted tweet that an ex-Muslim shared on Twitter, not someone that has a huge following, maybe 1,000, 2,000, I don't know how many followers they have, maybe 300. And it was a picture of a Muslim. It said Muslim man and had like shit in the brains and Quran on the heart. And I'm like, someone tagged it and said like this, another ex-Muslim, a gay ex-Muslim said, this is ridiculous. Why are you posting this? And I'm like, if you post things like that, I'm not going to follow you. I'm going to unfollow you. And then this person was like, oh, I never posted it. Someone else used my account. There's a few of us. I'm like, you're still responsible for posting this because it's your account, whether someone else is using your account or not. And then this person, and I said, I'm going to unfollow you. And this person's like, you're not following me. You're already not following me. I'm like, oh, that's probably why. Because you're posting stuff like this, stupid stuff like this. So why would I want to follow someone like that? And then this person got mad and said, I'm canceling them. Like, I was like, no one's canceling you. We just think that you shouldn't be post. I just didn't agree with your post. I thought it was in bad taste. It was
So
distasteful and it was stupid. Like it was a stupid post, right? Like I'm not here to attack people. I'm here to attack ideas,
yeah, and that's there's a point there too as well, right? So freedom of speech also entails the right to then criticize somebody for something that that you haven't liked. I don't think canceling somebody is the idea. You can choose not to follow them. I block people
Yeah.
that I don't like.
Yeah, exactly.
I absolutely fundamentally agree with their right to speak, right? Go ahead, crack on, mate. But that doesn't mean I need to listen. If I don't like what you're saying, and if I find you, quite frankly, disgusting or rude or aggressive or whatever, I don't need that in my life. Then I choose not to listen to you. You can carry on still in the ether there, cracking on, saying whatever you want. That's fine. That is 100% your right. But that doesn't mean I need to listen to you or associate with you. And there is a difference, I think. Unfollowing somebody or blocking them is fine. I think reporting them for things that they say, that's not something that I would do. I think I've only ever once reported somebody because they sent me like countless pictures of their genitalia,
Mhm.
and it was getting really quite disgusting. So I was like, I don't want to, I can't continue. But other than that, usually I wouldn't report them. And that was very, very early on, my earlier kind of
Yeah.
days the internet. I wouldn't normally do that anymore. But yeah, the right to, like, freedom of speech also comes with the right to not listen. You listen to those that you want to, and you don't listen to those that you don't. You can challenge the ones that you want to. If some people are just beyond challenging, you don't have to challenge them.
Yeah. I don't tend to report stuff like that, but if something is actually threatening violence, or someone should be, you should be killed, if someone says to me publicly something to that effect, I will report them, because I think, you know what, let the account be taken down because they're breaking Twitter rules or Facebook rules. I don't use it as a game, and I don't do it very often, but like, if people do that, and this, I thought this blog actually had a very good definition of canceling. Cancellation, properly understood, refers to an attack on someone's employment and reputation by a determined number of critics, collection of critics. Okay, so basically this is what canceling is. Like unfollowing, blocking, saying I don't agree with you. That's not canceling. Even reporting. This is more like getting a person, like, like, actually, if you think about it, actually, based on this definition, I have been canceled by Muslims. Like this, based on this definition, because I had Muslims calling my place of work and telling my boss that I should be fired because I speak about Islam. I do my
Mad.
work, I get my job done, and I do everything that I have to do. But because of what I do in the evenings and on my lunch, or whatever free time that I have, apparently I don't deserve to be a software developer. That has nothing, and I don't even claim to represent my company or wherever I was working for at the time. So I've been actually canceled in a sense, which is kind of hilarious. I didn't even know that. I didn't call it that at the time, but it's downright.
This is mob rule. This is mob
Yes,
rule.
yes.
Crossing the border, right? We see this kind of stuff in Islamic countries quite a lot, and kind of totalitarian regimes quite a lot. However, we have some protection in Western liberal democracies. I think it's getting worse because the mob now, it feels really, really emboldened. I think a few morons in Twitter think that that's the real world, that something that's said on Twitter actually means something.
Yeah. In my case, I think I could have actually lost the job. They decided not to fire me. They said that what I do on my private time is my business. I didn't even know about it until it happened the second time. When it happened the second time, I went to my boss and I said, "Hey, this is happening to me." And he's like, "Oh, I know." I was like, "What? You know about it?" He's like, "Yeah, it happened before." I was like, "This happened before?" And they didn't even tell me. But they just decided quietly they were going to deal with it on their own. And if anyone called, they would just tell them that no. Like, I don't know what they were going to tell them, but they knew about it, right? And so they decided.
That's really great on your employer's part, because nowadays that takes some courage.
That's what I'm saying. But I think it happened before at another company I was working, and I think I actually lost the job because of that. And at that time, I was just a contractor, so they didn't have any obligation to hire me anyways. I was just working on a contract basis. But I think this has happened to me multiple times. I just didn't even know about it, and I think people have been trying to shut me down by attacking my family life, which is so ridiculous, right? And yeah, you're right. It's great that the company decided not to, but it could happen again. And who knows at that time when it happens, how they'll deal with it. Every time they do it, it's a different situation, right?
Yeah.
Which is
But
why
this is characteristics of a witch hunt. People have kind of gotten used to having their pitchforks at the ready, and it's rather pathetic. I think nowadays people lack the intellectual resilience to dive into a debate and really go head to head on something that they might disagree with. I think it's really invigorating when you find somebody that you disagree with and you really, you continue that conversation, not necessarily even once, several times, and you might move position. I have myself gone from being completely open borders to wanting regulated migration through having some really tough discussions with some brilliant people. And that came from having that discussion. I was really resistant to it in the first instance because I didn't want to change my mind. I thought, well, this is a lovely hippie idea, but that's the problem when you start digging into it and you start looking into the practicalities of it, then you realize it is a silly hippie idea. You haven't put any thought into this, how you
yeah,
etc. Right? So the point of that, I guess, is that you need to have the discussion to know if you're right, to check your own kind of position on things, because you might very well be wrong. I think most people are kind of starting discussions from the point, well, I know I'm right here, and I know that that person is wrong. Well, they're not going to get anywhere because of that.
And I want to add a little bit more to this not Muslim enough for ex-Muslims. This is actually not just a problem with ex-Muslims, but it's a problem for even I find many Christians and non-Muslims in general, where they want to make Islam as bad. What they'll do is they'll take, sometimes it's a straw man, sometimes it's actually what Islam is. What they'll do, they try to take the worst possible interpretation of Islam, and they'll
Mhm.
say this is Islam. And if you're not
Mm.
doing this, you're not a proper Muslim. Oh, you don't
Yeah.
have slaves? Oh, you're not a true Muslim. And that's what they'll
Mm.
say. You're not a true Muslim. And I've actually been fighting against this idea because, like I said, like you said, we don't have a problem with people being Muslim. We don't care. We just have a problem with you pushing your ideas and, affecting other people's rights.
Mm.
That is a problem. That's why we have secularism. We don't care if anyone wants to be Muslim or not be Muslim. It's your own private life. It's your own personal beliefs. You can do whatever you want. Bullying someone for speaking up, like what happened to me, obviously what happened to you as well, that's a different thing. That's what we have a problem with. And so it's not just ex-Muslims, but in general, there's a certain crowd of people, and I get where they're coming from. They want to make Islam look as bad as possible so then they can condemn it. And so they'll say, well, Islam is this worst possible thing. And if you're not doing, and then if you're a Muslim, like for example, this is a very common one, and it happened even during this chat. Like people are telling this Muslim girl, oh, I'll do halala with you. They're like bullying her because she's Muslim, and they're saying things. And sometimes people will say like, something to the effect of like, basically, oh, you don't have 4 wives, you're not a good Muslim, or you're not beating your wife, or why don't you beat your wife? Oh, another one I was gonna say was, oh, you're not wearing hijab. Who are you to talk about Islam because you don't wear hijab? So you want her to wear hijab?
Yeah, yeah. But
Make
it's
up
none
your
of them.
mind.
Like even Islamically, it doesn't Islam teach you that your relationship is with God, not with other Muslims? So what business is it of theirs? But this constant, you're not a good enough Muslim, or you're not a good enough ex-Muslim, because both camps do it, and we know that. I've kind of reached the point where I think the moment somebody starts talking like that, I'm not really going to engage with them, because they're constantly projecting what they want on you. This isn't a two-way conversation. They want to talk at you. They're wanting to kind of offload on you, and also that antagonism. So that you mentioned earlier about people antagonizing online. So we see it on both sides. I've seen ex-Muslims antagonizing Muslims and then crying victim when they get attacked by those Muslims, and then the ex-Muslim community piling on that other person. And I'm like, I've watched this whole thing. Thank you very much. There was no
Yeah,
reason for you to get involved in that discussion.
yeah.
They're both doing it to each other. And actually, quite frankly, they're both making each side look bad. Both their own side and the opposite side. It's not
Yeah.
something that I really wish to be involved in.
Yeah. There's definitely some forms of activism that I don't agree with. This whole Allah is gay, burning the Quran. I don't know. It just seems edgy and immature and childish, and it doesn't seem to really achieve anything. I mean, in some maybe it does, and I kind of get the whole pushing the envelope thing. If someone is going to be like saying Allah is gay and then that's okay, then someone like me shouldn't be fired from the jobs because I'm just being reasonable. So if
Yeah.
people want to be, but me personally, I just think that being edgy and I don't know, it's not for me. That's just not my thing. Talking about Sami Yusuf, I wanted to say the funny thing is, poor Sami Yusuf, like these music, and a better example is Cat Stevens, Yusuf Islam. These
Yeah.
guys get so much hatred from Muslims. Why are you doing music? Why did you go back to music? It's just like that's the problem. And you have like, for example, like hijabi, like Instagrammers, they take off their hijab and they are like demonized. They are piled on like nobody else, from like Ali Dawa, Muhammad Hijab, other Muslim women are like shitting on them for taking off the hijab, and it's like like what, leave them alone, like let them be.
I think the internet's created a kind of a special kind of cesspit as well. Because thankfully I was able to do all of these things without the internet. Like I put the hijab on, I took the hijab off. I think I did both twice, right? Um, uh, and I was able to kind of do all of that. Yes, there was family pressure, but there was also like a kind of closing off of that at night. You kind of had uh, that kind of cutting off of that time and that kind of time to yourself to think about it, which I think a lot of young people aren't getting. But also, there's the other issue, by the way, within the ex-Muslim community, where they think you have to be left wing, and that anything that isn't the kind of far left, communist, nut job, that you are automatically far right. There's a rot that's set in here that is very, very concerning. And I've spoken to other non-believers who are feeling this as well, that support is conditional on you having the same political beliefs. Now, let me clarify something. So leaving or believing a faith is your goddamn right. So is your political affiliation. Choosing what you believe, whether it's your political affiliation or your religious affiliation, is your bloody right. And just because you don't agree with them doesn't mean you can label them as far right, because it makes you look intellectually weak when you do that. And
Yeah.
I keep doing it, and it's making me quite cross, actually,
Yeah.
that because they're not they're not these kind of communists or far left nut jobs, that you're going to label them as some kind of monster when they're actually moderates, a lot of them. They're either centrist or libertarian or conservative. They've not all of a sudden gone and joined the KKK.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely, there's this tendency to want to see everybody else as far left or far right. I want to because we've gone over the time that I was planning to have, and it's just been like a blast because we have so many ideas to talk about, and your insight is very valuable and interesting. Before I ask you that one last thing I want to talk about, which was the ex-Muslim label, which I know you had some pushback on. I want to talk about that quickly before we end. I just want to ask, is there anything you want to share in terms of social media where people can find you, or anything you want to, of yours that you want to plug?
Yeah, so my Twitter handle is Sadia936. Me and my partner are starting a new organization and a new YouTube channel. The YouTube channel is called For Freedoms International. Our first full video is going live tomorrow. Yeah, that's my partner. Isn't he beautiful? So yeah, our full YouTube video is going live tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. UK time, and there's like a little sneak preview of it today, just to give people a little taster of what's coming. Yeah, so please do subscribe to that. Yeah, that's the one. Do subscribe to that, and you'll see the kind of like preview in the comment in the tweets. Check out the preview. And hopefully I'll see you guys there.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, so please do check out her Twitter and this one as well, and you can learn about the new organization that she's developing. That's great. Now let's talk about one last thing before we end it, which is the ex-Muslim label. What do you think about the ex-Muslim label?
I think it's become quite divisive, actually. It's something that you mentioned about how there are other members of the non-believing community that have also been ostracized, that have also faced kickback from their families, lost everything. I feel like I wouldn't say I feel like I witnessed ex-Muslims wanting to kind of shut down other non-believers because they think that they are the most oppressed of the non-believing community, which firstly is factually untrue. The only additional difference is that in Islamic countries you can be put to death for being a non-believer, but you can't say that in the West that you're the most you're the most kind of marginalized, because it's just factually untrue. If you were sat in Saudi, you could probably say that. But you can't say that in England or Canada or America or Australia. So I take issue with that. I think it's creating fractures within the atheist community as well.
Mhm.
And I think that if you don't want to be part of the atheist mass, then you risk just creating another cult within that kind of within that demographic.
What do most ex-Muslims claim to be the most oppressed? Uh,
Yeah.
I haven't heard this. I've heard. I mean, I have heard people saying that they are. So my take on the ex-Muslim label, my friend Reason on Faith Sohail has a blog post on this as well, and he just shared it, but I was gonna share it anyways. I actually at one point stopped using the ex-Muslim label. I got annoyed and I'm like, you know what? This is identity politics and this is just, forget it. Like I'm not gonna use this label anymore. But then I found that I feel like it still has some utility. It still has some value there where it's a sort of rallying call to people to say that you can leave Islam and we exist. The name I think came up was I don't know if it's Miriam Namazi came up with it, and then ex-Muslims of North America obviously used the label as well as Sarah Haider and Muhammad Syed, and it became like a thing. Like in among Christians, you don't usually find Christians call themselves ex-Christians. There is an ex-evangelical sort of thing they use. But for now, I feel like it's a good thing to continue using until it becomes dissent becomes normalized, until leaving Islam becomes like until I think we get to the point where you can say I'm Muslim and I don't believe the Quran is the word of God. Kind of like you find some Jews using, like there's Jews who say, I'm Jewish, but I don't believe in God. And it's like, how does that work? I guess in some sense, the Jewish label is also a sort of ethnicity. It's seen as an ethnicity as well. But I think that's what like Hassan Radwan wanted when he said agnostic Muslim. And a lot of people are confused by what's an agnostic Muslim. Well, agnostic Muslim just means that you're Muslim by cult. You can also say cultural Muslim or whatever. I think ex-Muslim is another way of looking at it. It's another way of saying kind of F you to Islam, in a sense that like I'm no longer Muslim, but it's not the entirety of identities. It's not that I'm only an ex-Muslim. No, I'm also a father. I'm also a technology enthusiast. I also love biking and going to the gym, and so on and so forth. I'm a software developer. I mean, there's many facets to my identity. The activism, the ex-Muslim label is part of it, I feel. So yeah, that's my take on it.
I mean, that's it, right? So the ex-Muslim label has become this thing that's all people see. You're right, it does feed into identity politics, and for that reason, it has become incredibly divisive, actually. The issue with identity politics is, rather than saying that they want equality, they're asking for us to be treated better than other communities, for us to get special rights. I think when that stops, then I'll be a bit more convinced that on it by itself, it's an important label to have. That isn't what I see, sadly. Atheists within and non-believers within the kind of Muslim context have existed since the beginning of Islam. Blasphemers have existed since the beginning of Islam. So why do we need this new label right now? I'm still really not convinced by it. I think in terms of making the point that it is only Muslim countries that still kill non-believers, that is important. But apostasy of all kinds is landing people,
Yeah.
getting people killed.
Yeah.
Dissent
Yeah.
of all kinds is getting all kinds of people killed. Why not feed into the dissenting movement? Why not feed into a movement that brings you into a larger kind of group? Why this separatist sort of movement? And within that, there have been conditions attached. Being an ex-Muslim that criticizes ex-Muslims means that you no longer get the support from ex-Muslims. I can attest to that for goddamn sure. So there's that thing. But then to me, certainly what I felt was, so you leave Islam and then you lose your family and community, and then you decide that you no longer buy this whole ex-Muslim stuff, and you lose your family and your community, or the new family you've built within that.
Yeah.
So what's the difference? There is none. It's just
Yeah.
another cult that came out of a cult. To me, right now, that's what I'm certainly seeing.
Mm.
And this cult is become fashionable within that cult to attach new identities so that you can still remain relevant. you know I'm a, I don't know, LGBT ex-Muslim or whatever. They're kind of always wanting to, the reason it's feeding into it is because they're kind of constantly borrowing stuff from other identities to ensure that they remain relevant, particularly as it becomes easier to criticize Islam.
Mhm. But what about people that don't care about relevance, just like nominal ex-Muslim? When I say nominal, I mean they're not activists. I know a ton of people in ex-Muslims in North America. They go for meetups, they make jokes about Islam in the group, among closed doors, but everyone thinks they're still Muslim. They have no
Mm.
relevance to the community other than their own, and so from my perspective, I feel like there's many different things, overlapping issues here. There is some cultish sort of tribalistic thing going on because we humans are like that, and we tend to do that. We leave one group and we want to form another one. I do think that the support services of ex-Muslims of North America are so vital to people that have left lost their family support. And I do think that, yeah, you could end up becoming ostracized from that new group as well. As possible. I don't know how often that happens, because I think that happens far less often, because if you insult Muhammad or something and you're not Muslim anymore and you can be attacked by your family or whatever. But I mean, I guess it's possible that you can be ostracized by ex-Muslims for other reasons, and that does happen. But I
It's
think
definitely
I do think we are probably a little bit more tolerant than Muslims are in general, because it's not a holy thing. Like, for example, if someone attacks Dawkins or whatever, like, yeah, I'm a fan of his books. I think he did good, scientific literacy. He brought it to the masses. But like, if he says something wrong, like, I don't really like. I'm like, yeah, it's wrong what he said, about, let's say, pedophilia, whatever. He's not a prophet to me. Maybe some people do treat them like prophets, but I think that's less common. But yeah,
mm,
there's definitely with the left, the ex-Muslims in North America in general, ex-Muslims do tend to be more left-leaning in general, and so I do see where there's some. I do agree with you that there's pushback on you if you're more right-leaning or more conservative,
mm,
because when you leave Islam, you're expected to leave behind conservatism as well, I guess, and that's a
yeah,
fallacy. And it's good. It's good that we have some sort of diversity in the ex-Muslim community too, because otherwise, it becomes too easy to just put us in a box and to say, well, you guys are pro pornography and you're pro this and pro that. Whereas, no, not necessarily. It may
yeah,
not be the case that all Muslims are in favor of like pornography or whatever. Maybe a lot of Muslims are in favor of, like conservative, having a family, like a traditional family or whatever. Not everyone has to be like out swinging or something like that. Like, they're kind of putting us in this, so yeah, I do agree with you on a lot of that. Do you want to add any final words before we end it?
no,
Any
I
final
just think,
comments or thoughts?
I do think you're right. Like, in terms of the ex-Muslim community, yeah, there is a level of acceptance, but there's also, for those that are conservative or not as far left as some of the kind of leaders of the movements, there's not really a home. If you were somebody who was more of a populist, and there's a difference between a populist and far right, then you wouldn't really find a home there. If you were a Trump supporter, do you think the ex-Muslim community is going to be welcoming of you? Now, I don't necessarily have to like Trump, but I don't have a problem with somebody who voted for or liked Trump.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely, absolutely. And we need to start looking at people. I think this is just a problem in general with human beings, and that's specifically a problem with the left right now, is this demonizing of people that are not left enough. And it's like the whole Salafi thing I told you, where it's becoming
yeah,
self-consuming, where you can never be left enough. You can never be like perfect enough for them, and it's becoming
yeah.
this toxic ideology.
Yeah, well, that's it. Like, most left-wing movements end up eating themselves up alive from the inside out until they're a shell of a movement, and they're not really functioning for the purposes that they were set up. And that is where I see the ex-Muslim movement heading, really. But this is it, right? So a community of dissenters that don't really like dissenters within their own community, that's uh, that's a little bit of an issue, really. I don't really know where that goes. I think if you're for dissent, you have to be for all dissent, right? Even if it's
Yeah, I agree. It's gone too far. It's gone too far. This cancel culture, this super woke culture, this like blocking, like it's becoming like totalitarian leftism now at the point, and I'm not an expert on this, but I do think it is going too far, and I do think that it's going to ultimately end up hurting ex-Muslims. It's already happening. I think it's already happening, but it's good that we have a diversity of voices and political perspectives and political views and ideologies among ex-Muslims. We're not a monolith for sure, and I hope that we have more respect and we're able to talk to each other more and not cancel each other as much. And yeah, I thank you so much for the conversation. Any final words you wanna end with?
No, I mean, if you guys could plug For Freedoms, that would be really, really good. We've only just started. Our first video, like first preview, went up today. So we're hoping to kind of build on that. Would really like that. But other than that, no, I think we're good. It was a really good conversation. Thank you for having me.
Okay, wonderful. All right, thanks everyone, and see you guys again at the next live stream. Bye.
Thank you.